So welcome back to part two of Authentic AF series with Ivan and Ed, and we're going to be discussing macros today. Last week we went deep into metabolism, metabolic damage, physiologically and psychologically, and whether it's real or not. And today we're going to dive deep into macros, discussing protein, fats, and carbs. And we were just talking about it before we got on air today around Ed's previous obsession of around not giving anyone carbs after 6. So let's kick it off with that one. That's something everyone's heard, is that once the clock kicks 6 p.m., anything you eat that's carbohydrate based is going straight to body fat.
Yeah, no, I was definitely a big proponent of that back in the day. Thankfully, before I was qualified as a trainer, so I never put that on to any of my clients. But I remember back at uni, I would, I was going out a lot. I wasn't really tracking my food. I was eating huge bowls of pasta at lunch, so it wasn't like I was eating, like a conscious way. But as soon as the clock struck 6, there was no way a carbohydrate was going into me. I was so scared that it was just going to, go straight on my belly. So it'd be, like I said, anything in the day, 4 nights a week, I'd be out drinking. But if I was in on a night and it hit 6 o'clock, it'd be like egg whites, maybe some veggies, but anything else, no way.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
To be honest, if I think back, I think I heard it at some point when I was at secondary school. And so I wasn't reading anything, reputable at that point. So it must have just been either like a newspaper, someone who just told me at school, or just, just some little bit of hearsay. But, as you do, I guess you just clock on to certain things. I thought, oh, okay, maybe that's the reason I haven't got abs. My mum does give me my dinner at 6:30, and we do have pasta a lot. Ahead, until you get told or proven otherwise, it's just in your head, and that's just what you think, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah. Or a big rationale was if, it was because usually in the evening times, you'll be winding down and go to bed. You don't need as much energy. Carbohydrates are energy. Therefore, you shouldn't have carbs after 6. But it's like, well, what if I train at 6:30 p.m.?
I think it's also really based on the idea that whatever you eat is just fueling your next 3 hours to the next meal or whatever. And it's like, it's that immediate effect that it's going to have. But, as we know, that's not the case.
No. Isn't there research that eating... Go on, Ivan. Go on.
I was going to say that's, even with your pre-workout meal, whatever you eat an hour before, if it's like a mixed meal, you're not going to be actually getting that energy from that meal in your workout. The best it's going to do is sort of keep you full during your workout so you don't get hungry during your workout, so to speak, right? So it's a lot of that is very placebo. It's very mental. The whole carbohydrates thing in general, carbohydrates and energy have always been that they've always had that link, There's even been research done on cyclists doing like mouth rinses of just like some sugary water, not even swallowing it, just rinsing it in their mouth, and they get a performance boost, which is pretty crazy, right?
I remember when I was at university, we were studying sports science. Those studies were massive at the time. The mouth washing of carbohydrates, and it's just that psychological boost that people get. In fact, I was having an email exchange yesterday with the client of ours who was saying they prefer a training day, non-training day split, even in muscle building phases, because they like the psychological element of having more carbs pre and post. Even though it makes no difference to performance, but they just like that psychological boost that they're feeling like they're going to fuel their session. But we know that the carbs don't actually hit till a few hours later than
exactly
workout meal.
Yeah, and so much of your energy during high intensity activities, such as like lifting weights, is going to come from muscle glycogen, which is carbohydrates stored within the muscles. But after you've actually consumed it can take approximately 6 hours to be converted to muscle glycogen that you can actually use. So really, if you're doing an early morning session, you're training before work, is the carbs that you're going to be having that evening or for the previous day that's going to have the greatest impact on your performance, not the banana that you have as you're walking through the gym door or whatever it is.
But on that though, the banana, if you're having it first thing, can actually top up liver glycogen, which is what gets tanked overnight the most. So if you tank that up, it will allow you to sort of use muscle glycogen a little bit better too. But that's like nitpicky, right? So, and you'll feel better. You'll feel better having that banana in your system versus nothing. you know. But yeah, from an energy standpoint, it's the food that you ate the night before that is going to be fueling your workouts for sure. Yeah.
Most people aren't thinking about their liver glycogen when they're having that banana. They're just thinking.
Maybe they are after last episode with liver hypertrophy.
Yeah,
that's true. That's why they can't lose that.
We did carbs after 6. I know there was because this was a big thing. I think in the 90s and early 2000s. I think a lot of it came from the bodybuilding circles. There used to be a thing called carb cutoffs. I don't know if you remember this, but it was very much like you eat carbs during the day and then it's carb cutoffs in the evenings. But I think to lose body fat or to at least keep body fat under control while you're in building phases. But I think what got missed in that is that it's really just calorie control. That's all that really matters. And what's allowing people to lose body fat by dropping carbs at night is probably because they're just dropping calories overall.
That's every strategy.
And if you look at the average person's diet, when are they probably most likely consuming the highest amount of calories and within that highest amount of carbohydrate? Probably post 6 o'clock. They're at home, having finished work, they're watching Netflix, and they're mindlessly putting, food into their mouths. That's probably when most of the calories are going in. And so even though there might not be any science behind 6 o'clock cutoff, that if you have seen a positive effect in your body composition from it, it's likely because you've just taken out that kind of, in quotes, danger time kind of thing.
Isn't there some like research around eating more carbs at night, especially if you're lean training and you're someone who trains hard, the metabolism actually increases overnight?
I think that
very minimal metabolism changes. I'm not talking like huge, but
the boost would be just from eating a lot of food, which is always going to be the case, right? And remember, this is all in the context of a calorie deficit.
Yeah.
So it's your metabolism can only be boosted so much within the context of a deficit. If it boosts too much, you're not in a deficit. You know what I mean? You're in a surplus. Like, people like, have a big spike day and rev my metabolism up. Yeah, you'll rev it up for that day, but you've just lost like 2-3 days of fat loss. You're not getting any more fat loss from that spike, as we discussed last week. But yeah, so whatever metabolic boost you get is literally just from the increase in food that you're having for that meal. But also a heavier meal a few hours before bed can actually help some people get to sleep. So if you are in a deficit and you are banking most of your calories towards the end of the day, and you find that you sleep better on a fuller stomach, it actually could be a good strategy in that regard.
Psychologically, go ahead.
No, that's what I was just going to say. Linking in with psychology really is just where the optimal time to place your carbs is really just dependent on your preference and how you feel best. Some people like having a big breakfast, helps them feel like they're energized for the day. Some people like a bit before a workout, post-workout. As Ivan said, I'm a fan of having a reasonable amount of carbohydrate before bed. I find that it just helps with my sleep quality. And so as long as calories are in line with your target and overall carbohydrates are matched up with how you want your macros to be split, the actual timing really just comes down to your personal preference, what fits you and your schedule, really.
From a social point of view, there's a lot of benefits to actually having carbs after 6 p.m. because that's typically when people have the more carbohydrate-based meal. And if you're turning up like, no carbs, it can be quite socially awkward and it's not going to fit in with a lifestyle solution. Whereas if you're actually basing your carbs after 6, it might make it easier long term to be adherent and to be more inclusive with your loved ones.
For sure. Yeah, and I think there's that kind of almost diet coined as a carb backloading, which I think people talk a lot about because you're going to have all of your carbs after you've trained and et cetera, but in reality it just fits with a lot of people's lifestyles really well because either they're socializing or they're relaxing or they're not as busy. They then get to put more of their food later on in the day.
I think we've nailed that one. And there's one that you mentioned that we kind of skirted over, was the whole revving of your metabolism. I think that might be an interesting one to discuss. Is you often hear that I think I'm plateauing. Do we need to rev the metabolism and get it going again? And a lot of that's to do with refeeding, or some people call it cheat meals, which I don't personally like the term of. But the idea basically is to spike your calories in order to encourage more fat loss. How much truth is there to that, and when is it actually applicable?
I think from a purely physiological fat loss perspective, not necessary. I think a lot of that is more of a mental break, right? And this is where a lot of research now is coming from diet breaks. You know, I don't know, there was a recent one, I think it was called the Matador study, where it was like 2 weeks on, or 2 weeks on a diet, 2 weeks maintenance, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks maintenance. And at the end of the diet, they compared that to a group which dieted straight for X amount of time, and they both got relatively similar results. But the group that did the diet break apparently had more lean mass retention by the end of the diet. But a caveat there is, well, the people that were doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off were dieting for like twice as long when you think about it, right? So imagine just going 2 weeks on, maintenance for 2 weeks, 2 weeks on, maintenance for 2 weeks. Just when you get into that diet rhythm, it's like, oh, break, you know what I mean? And they were dieting for like double the length of time. And even that difference in lean mass retention or whatever it was, I think there was some evidence of that they had a higher resting metabolic rate by the end of it, but the differences were like negligible. And there was a lot of like, well, they only measured the sort of end result after they were carved up a bit, right? And we know that when you carb someone up from a depleted standpoint, it is going to have this temporary increase in lean mass that isn't actual muscle. So they just had more glycogen in their muscles at the time of measurement. So even that was just like a little bit, from my interpretation of the evidence, so to speak, there is no physiological benefit to diet breaks or refeeding from like a fat loss perspective. But I still think that if they are timed correctly, and if someone's really in the gutter or whatever it is, and they are timed nicely, yes, you can rev the metabolism up a little bit, but you're not going to be losing fat within that time. You're just going to be restoring some psychological well-being or whatever. You're going to feel better. You're not going to feel as lethargic, and that may encourage you to keep dieting. You know what I mean? So it's like a pit stop. That's probably the best way I would explain it. It's a pit stop if you feel that you need it. But a lot of people think they need it, but they don't, which is where coaching comes in. You know.
I think it's only applicable when you're extremely lean.
Even then, even if you are extremely lean, it doesn't help you lose more fat. Yeah. It just stops you losing less. It stops you losing as much lean mass temporarily. But depending on how lean you get, depending on how lean you really want to get, you are going to be losing some lean mass to some extent. And maybe diet breaks can prevent that to a minor extent. But at the end of the day, shredded is shredded. You know, like it's just you need to cut hard to really get there. You know what I mean? You can do it in many, many ways, and it's probably a more fun way being able to have a refeed here and there, this and that. But I wouldn't say that you having that refeed is allowing you to lose more fat during that refeed. That's not going to happen.
I remember there was one strategy that there was espoused in the bodybuilding circles where once a week you have a time limit. You know, the clock hits and there's a 6 hour window.
Is that the skip load?
Yeah. It's a 6 hours. It changes depending how lean you get. So it starts at like 4 to 6 hours and it goes all the way up to 12 to 18 maybe. And it's literally anything goes. So long as it's high carb, low fat, anything goes. Any sort of food. And I've seen people do it. And I remember on the day of it happening, just people bringing in loads of food because they were colleagues of mine. They were bringing in like all sorts of crap into the place. And what it did, from what I saw, it gave them a lot of vascularity and it gave them a lot of glycogen filling for the next day or so. But then a couple of days later, after being on a diet again, they were just back to being quote unquote flat.
Yeah. And probably more watery as well.
And I think that really, for a lot of people, is just I don't think it's good for long-term, it's definitely not good for long-term relationship with food, definitely. But I think the reason it can work for some people in at least in the short term is because they have this something to look forward to, almost like it gives them a reason to stick to the diet, which is obviously not a way that is going to, like I said, help you long-term with your relationships with food and lifestyle. But people will look at that, say Saturday or Sunday, they'll push themselves because they know they're going to have this binge day. And then it's just this cycle each week, which I think is really short-sighted way of trying to improve adherence during the week. But as I say, like so short-sighted because I can't think of a better way to create a bad relationship with food and a binge and restrict cycle. because that's literally just the definition of it, isn't it? Those diets are very aggressive during the week to then allow you to just go crazy at the weekend, which ultimately, is that what you want to be doing long term? And I think this is where some things from the bodybuilding circles have crept into general population, because bodybuilding is a competitive endeavor, and so their main focus isn't their relationship with food, isn't necessarily their mental state or their health. And so things like these massive refeed days or these cheat meals and things, they can't then be applied to people who just want to live a sustainable and healthy lifestyle, because it's two separate things. It's almost the same as exercising to get in good shape and be healthy, but then potentially there's some points where I'm sure powerlifters will say at some points they're going beyond what would be optimal for health, and they're just doing things purely for performance. It may be hurting their bodies physically, but they're in a competitive realm, and that's what they're doing it for. And so that's where I think the differentiator needs to become, because bodybuilders are doing whatever it takes to compete. They have to stand there naked on a stage, whereas the average person wants that longevity in their life and the good lifestyle. And if you try and get to your checkpoint or get in shape using these unsustainable measures, then you're not going to stay there, and you're going to be in a bad way.
Yeah, it's gold. I think the bodybuilding, there's also that conception that bodybuilders are in complete control of their physiques, whereas most of them we know they probably have the worst view of their own bodies and the worst mental state around their relationship with food, because like you said, they're doing these things just to almost continue going, because they have to be so on all year round. So, but like you said, the comparison, it's so much of it has fed into the general pop, and it's only making people's relationship with food worse.
Yeah, and also like Ed sort of touched on it earlier with people having that one meal to look forward to on the weekend. Now, on the surface, that may look like a positive, but then if you really take a step back, and then if you now look at it as, oh, yes, I get to have that one cheat day or whatever it is, every day besides that day now is going to feel horrible to you, right? Because now you're comparing your normal day-to-day diet with this extreme thing that you've done on the weekend. Now your whole dieting week you feel like garbage, because you're like, I hate this food, where's my donuts or whatever it is, because now you're comparing your day-to-day diet with this extremely tasty whatever that you've chosen to have on the weekend. And now that can also just make the entire process even harder. You know what I mean? You have that last bite on the weekend, you're like, oh no, I'm back to my diet again, and is that really the way that you want to live? Is that really the way you think long-term behavior change happens? So just something to consider too.
The problem with
that made me so happy this week, actually, because it was Diwali last weekend, and I had some clients. And I just said, how did you get on? And the vast majority of them said, I enjoyed it, enjoyed the food, but didn't overdo it. Just enjoyed the portion I had. And I was asking, how did you find it? And they basically, the general consensus was, by not feeling restricted and not feeling as if they were having to pull back all week in the lead up to it, they didn't have this urge to binge. And that's something I can definitely relate to. If you feel like you're restricting yourself all week, by the time you get to this weekend or an event, or whatever it is you're restricting for, the wheels fall off and you go crazy, because you've had this strong urge to overdo it. Whereas if you're in a place where you're not feeling restricted constantly, you get to these events and you can enjoy them for what they are, which is a time to spend time with loved ones, and then enjoy the food, but there isn't this urge or this need to then go over the top.
Yep. Yeah.
With
I had the same experience.
Yeah. I had someone last week say in the lead up to this, they were going to pull back every day. And I said, and this is someone who's not trying to get lean. This is someone who's just trying to live a healthy, sustainable lifestyle. And I said, there's a real important shift that we make here this week, in that you don't restrict in the lead up, because I think it's even more important when you've got into shape. One of the keys to stay in shape is to get rid of that mindset. And we see so many who are trying to play that game of restrict and binge through the weeks, just to sort of maintain a body weight, which is why that if you want to stay in shape, it's not about just playing that game of binge restricting. It's got to be done with healthy behavioral practices. And one of them is to take any meal, any day off a pedestal and just be balanced throughout the week, as opposed to seeking those highs and, wanting those treats, so to speak. Because, we're not dogs, are we? We don't need treats to keep ourselves normal.
It's just food. Yeah.
So that's refeeds and cheat meals. So just staying on the topic of macros, another one we hear often is around an obsession with protein, and that protein is king. And anything, if you eat protein or too much, you can never eat too much of protein. And we've seen in when we've done, in our recent recruitment drive, where we do that case study around seeing someone, how they pull the pin on a client and how they would get someone in shape. No one wants to touch protein. If anything, anyone wants to increase protein because they think it's the magic macro still. And this isn't just general population we're talking about. We're talking about trainers in the industry and coaches in the industry who still have this have a pedestal around protein. So let's talk protein. How much do you need? Firstly, what are the ranges, and what are the drawbacks of going too high on protein?
Well, I'll say as a minimum, if you're training, looking to preserve muscle mass, add muscle mass, I think research has shown anywhere between 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilo as like a minimum, which I think I think most people can hit that quite easily. You can go up as high as you really want to. If you wanted to go like double body weight and you got no kidney problems or whatever it is, or if you want to go like 2 grams per pound or whatever that is, you can go as high as you like, but it's not going to, anything above 1.8 or even 2 grams per kilo isn't going to add you more muscle mass after that. You know what I mean? There is a limit with how much it can be utilized for muscle growth, and with everything else everything else that protein uses in the body can all be covered with that 1.8 to 2 grams per kilo. But then again, if it depends on the protein sources too, that is also a consideration. If you're an omnivore and you're eating a lot of animal products, you probably can get away with maybe the 1.6 to 1.8. If you are a vegetarian and a lot of your or vegan and a lot of your protein sources are plant-based, it probably would be a good idea to maybe aim for the 2 grams per pound, just to be sort of safe, because
2 grams per kilo,
protein, 2 grams per kilo.
Not 2 grams per pound.
Sorry, Australian, yeah. But if you're vegan, vegetarian, you want to be aiming for that double, per kilo, just to stay safe, and because there is some protein that is lost through just assimilation, digestion, stuff like that, especially if it's combined with like a lot of fiber and some plant material as well. And also, if you are vegan, vegetarian, you do need to sort of make sure that you are getting the full spectrum of amino acids as well. That's something to consider too. Otherwise, you're going to be falling a little bit short there. So other than that, anything beyond that is literally personal preference.
Just to confirm that, because I like using per pound, and so just to get both ends of the spectrum. No. The thing is, it's weird because in the UK we're all about kilos, but when it comes to protein or macros, it's pounds. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But just for anyone thinking about pounds, it's zero. I like to say 0.8 to 1, somewhere there, which is typically around 1 is around 2.2 per kilo, and 0.8 is probably around the 1.6, 1.7. So somewhere along in that range is always going to do you good. Where you don't want to be doing is the 2 grams per pound, which is like 4 grams per kilo. And I've done that before, and it's just not comfortable, is it?
But I think in terms of maxing out that kind of protein intake, I think we do sometimes get some concerns about, kidney health. And just to touch on really for anyone listening is that if you have pre-existing kidney issues, then that is a consideration. But if you have, fully functioning healthy kidneys, then there's absolutely no research to show that high protein intake, has any detrimental effect to health. Instead, like we said already, it just comes then down to personal preference. There's no physiological advantage of increasing beyond that upper limit. But if you love eating meat or whatever it is, then maybe that just suits your food preferences. But as Ivan said, it's not going to build you any extra muscle. Likewise, if you're on a muscle building phase, carbohydrates actually are very anabolic when linked in with protein, in terms of if your carbs are high, you don't actually need as much protein to still build muscle. So that's another thing to think of. If you are in a muscle building phase, if you've already hitting a good protein intake, pushing that up any higher isn't going to have any more of a beneficial effect on it. And so therefore, maybe looking at increasing carbs or fats is going to be more advantageous.
Carbs are actually protein sparing, which is one of the reasons. And I think I said I lowered someone's protein the other day to around that sort of 0.8 grams per pound, and he's in the muscle building phase now, but he thought I lowered it because he's in lockdown, and he thought because he's not training in the gym he needs lower protein. And I said, and he's like, are we going to push that back up and really go aggressive once we get back in the gym? I was like, no, this is cool. Like we're good here. We don't need to go any higher. He's like, let's use those macros we'd allocated to carbs and fats, unless of course you really enjoy eating protein, and that's okay. Like if you enjoy eating protein, by all means jack it up, but don't jack it up because you want to build more muscle, because that won't do anything.
And you've got to think, sorry jump in there. You've got to think every time you increase protein, you're going to have to lower fats or carbs to stay within your overall calorie intake. And so although there's nothing necessarily detrimental about pushing protein higher, you have to look at the knock-on effect to the other areas. So if protein's through the roof, by virtue of that, carbs and potentially fats as well are going to have to be lower to keep in that total calories. And so you have to look at what you have to take away on the balance of that.
Just on that note with the kidneys, where that myth came from is that because one of the main biological roles of the kidney is to metabolize and excrete urea, which is like a nitrogen byproduct from protein digestion. So back in the 80s and 90s, I think they did a few studies and they clocked onto this and they thought, oh, the physiology shows this. That means if you have too much protein, it's going to impact your kidneys. But the reality is they've done research on protein overfeeding studies. I think they were done by, Jose Antonio. And he did numerous protein overfeeding studies where he took it to like 4 grams per pound or something ridiculous like that, and found no evidence of such a thing. So that's another case that we spoke about on the last episode, where like metabolism or what you see in biochemistry textbooks doesn't always translate into the real world, and taking things too literally can affect your thinking around certain things.
Mm-hmm.
What about protein timing? Again, this is another thing that we hear a lot about in terms of myths, where we hear you need to spike your protein every 6 times a day, or you have the other crowd, which is like just have one big meal a day. What's the thinking around protein timing and benefits?
I think there is, after you've hit your protein total for the day, I think if there is one macro that you want to sort of time out of all of them, I would say protein would be the most important, just for the MPS spikes, et cetera. But the whole thinking that you need to spike that 6 times per day to get more muscle growth, that myth has probably been destroyed, I think, with the whole, spike in the metabolism, trying to eat every 3 hours, et cetera. And I think the most recent research shows that anywhere between 3 to 5 good servings of protein per day, and that can be anywhere between 30 to 40 grams per serving, is usually going to give you a good muscle, or even 20 grams depending on your body weight, right? So anywhere between 20 to 40 grams per meal, 3 to 5 times a day, within the context of you hitting your total for the day, seems to be a really good range to aim for. You do want to make sure that there is a minimum of protein at your meal, which is why I don't like, this is another one of the reasons I don't like people snacking or trying to have meals in between their meals, because there is a mechanism of, it's called the muscle full effect, or the refractory period, where when you do have a meal, when you spike MPS rises for a couple hours, and it actually does have to drop back down to baseline before you can spike it again. Okay, and this is where the whole eat every 3 to 5 hours comes in. The smaller the meal, obviously the quicker MPS will drop back down to baseline. The bigger the meal, the longer it's going to be. So if you have like one meal that's, say, 60 grams of protein, you may not have to eat again for like 5 hours, and then you have that next bout, wait another 5 hours, and you have that next bout. So if there is something that you are going to time, I think that can have a potential impact over the long term. But at the end of the day, if you're getting your total protein in for the day, that is always going to be the most important thing. The whole scheduling your meals perfectly doesn't have to be that precise. But if you can sort of place your protein meals, I would say a good 3 to 5 hours apart, depending on the size of the meal, that's going to be the best for you going forward from a muscle protein synthesis sort of point of view.
I'm just going to say, you should probably say what MPS is.
Muscle protein synthesis.
Muscle protein synthesis. There you go.
Yeah.
If you look at muscle protein synthesis, is like, in very layman's terms, it's just like the building blocks of amino acids coming together to form proteins. And what we want to do throughout the day is have greater levels of MPS versus MPD, which is muscle protein degradation. What you spoke about with the minimum requirements, we might as well go a bit deeper into that, because I think people will be interested in it. In that, you talked about the refractory period, but the reason for the minimum is also to get that trigger, the anabolic trigger.
The leucine.
Exactly, the leucine spike, which is one of the amino acids that makes up protein, which is probably why leucine became so big on the supplement scene a while ago, where everyone was like, you got to have loads of leucine. And again, there's another thing where physiology has been taken completely out of context, because you don't need so much leucine, you just need enough to spike it. And that typically comes around having that sort of serving size you mentioned of around 25 to 40 grams per meal. Gives you enough leucine to spike the trigger to offset MPS and give you all the benefits that you're going to get from protein.
Exactly. And then the thing, but then people went the other way and started supplementing with leucine all day, thinking that they can just like continuously spike. They just keep triggering it. But what you realize is it's like leucine sends the signal, but you still need all the other guys around to get the job done, right? So it's like the supervisor at a construction site on his own going, all right, guys, put everything together. And there are no workers that can actually build anything. You know what I mean? So the supervisor's there to be like, all right, let's go, let's do it. That's leucine. And then everyone else starts building. That's all the other amino acids, you know?
Well, what they did they did the research study, didn't they? They had the whey protein, which has all the amino acids, which I believe are 20, right? 20 amino acids. Then they had the EAAs, and then the essential amino acids, and then they had was it just leucine or was it BCAA? I can't remember which one it was in this study. And they compared the ability to keep protein synthesis high, and I think all of them spiked it, but the complete protein is what sustained it for the longest period of time.
I think it's just a good. Sorry.
Go.
As a good general guideline, though, I would just say to get your daily protein target, figure out how many meals you want to eat a day, what fits with your preferences, your schedule, and then just divide that target by the number of meals. And that's going to give you a good dose of protein at each point. That's a sustainable way of getting it in for you as well. Obviously, you can hear professional bodybuilders eating 6 meals a day, eating however many grams of protein a day, but we need to realize that, if these guys are 300 pounds, their protein intake, if you just look at it in proportion to body weight, is going to be a lot higher than most people's. Likewise, their calorie requirements are going to be so big, they might need to eat 6 meals a day, just out of logistics point of view, because they might be having to eat 1,000 calories a meal 6 times a day. Whereas for the average person, that's not an issue. And so I think that's where some of the confusion can come around with needing that many meals, that many protein servings, that much protein per meal.
It's funny, most people would actually do well on the typical breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe one smaller meal later on.
Yeah. Lots of sounds. Yep.
Just came back in full circle. I think we all started off having breakfast, lunch, dinner. Then we all moved to like 6 meals a day, and I'm back to breakfast, lunch, dinner, just at different times. But
yep.
It's funny how a lot of things, if you think about it, all the things we're probably talking about, we've all been through it. We all started off not knowing anything. We all thought we knew too much and tried every single thing that physiologically thought made sense. And now we're just kind of gone back to the simple.
Yeah.
So
with training.
Yeah. I mean, training, we can have a separate one on that. On the spikes, I was thinking of spikes, and I thought another spike that is spoken about a lot is the insulin spike, and that the insulin spike you gain from carbs or whatever you're eating is gonna stop all fat burning. That's another big one that went through the rounds quite a lot. And again, it come from bodybuilding because bodybuilders using exogenous insulin, and again also from physiology, because physiology shows that you get spikes in increases in insulin will stop fat burning on a very like cellular level, but over the 24-hour period is what matters. Let's talk about these spikes then.
Well, it obviously, you know, one of insulin's main jobs is a storing hormone, so to speak, or it's more of like it sends a sort of signal to the body to do a certain thing. So every time you eat a meal, no matter what the food is, at that point in time, you're not burning any fat. Yeah. Whatever you eat for that amount of time, for how long it takes you to digest, get into your system, et cetera, you are in a temporary surplus. And then when you're not eating, you're in a temporary sort of deficit, right? And you go through these throughout the entire day. And what determines weight gain or weight loss is, are you spending more time in a sort of catabolic state or an anabolic state? Are you spending more time in a surplus or a deficit? Throughout the whole day, you are doing both. It's just the magnitude of which one are you doing more of? And that is what gets the net result. So yes, technically, you have a meal that has carbs, protein, whatever it is, you spike insulin. Yes, fat burning for that amount of time is not happening. You're storing energy. That's completely fine. But if over the course of the day, the time you spend not storing energy is greater than the time spent storing energy, what happens? You lose energy and you're in a deficit, you lose body fat. So that whole thing again has just been taken completely out of context. You hear, well, insulin causes fat storage, therefore I need to do everything to avoid any sort of insulin spike ever. And if you did that, you would be dead very quickly.
There's actually a really good study that demonstrates that really well as well. There was a professor in America who just ate, I think they're called Twinkies, which I don't think we have over here, but it's basically just like a high carb, like cakey kind of, almost Twinkie diet food, right? And he only ate Twinkies, apart from he also had some protein shake, so a protein supplement just to help maintain muscle mass. And he only ate that for a prolonged period of time. He lost a substantial amount of body fat. All the health markers he was tracking improved, which were linked in with the reduction in body fat. And if we look back to then its relationship with insulin, he was eating, virtually a large amount of his calories come from carbohydrate. A lot of them were, like very sugary sources. So his insulin would have been getting spiked aggressively when it was getting spiked. But because he was still in a calorie deficit, he was still dropping body fat, which I guess really just shows that you can spike insulin hard like he was, but overall the deficit is what's going to win in the end, or, really determine whether weight loss or weight gain is occurring.
Yeah, so and on that note, I'm not telling everyone to eat Twinkies.
I was literally about to say the same thing.
he actually reported later saying he was miserable. He said he was hungry all the time. He didn't have like the best energy. He didn't have the best like mental clarity. And if you had to do that, imagine having to do that for the rest of your life. You're not going to function optimally. So even though he lost weight, even though his blood markers did improve, it wasn't the healthiest or the most optimal way to do it. So.
And one thing also with regards to the insulin spikes, and this is speaking from personal experience, is you don't want to be, you want to let them happen. Because if you're in a deficit and you're lean, that's okay. What you don't want to be doing is trying to figure out all the ways you can reduce these spikes. Like I don't know about you guys, but I try things like, apple cider vinegar, put cinnamon on all the foods, because cinnamon apparently reduces insulin, improves insulin sensitivity.
Alpha lipoic acid, ALA.
Yeah, this is the craziest thing, right? So I was on this all-inclusive holiday about maybe 7-8 years ago, and after every meal, what I used to do, I was at this point I was obsessed with keeping insulin low. So after every meal, I used to run back to the hotel room and knock back a couple of caps of omega-3s, because I thought if I have these omega-3s, anything I eat, especially the ice creams I just had, the spike won't go up, so I won't have any spike, and that way I'll stay lean. I'm literally just thinking about that run to the hotel room.
I was exactly the same as that. Like I used to base my diet around managing insulin spikes and like keep remaining as sensitive to insulin as possible. despite us probably in a surplus anyway. Like, I mean, I used to live, cinnamon went on every food I ate, and apple cider vinegar. I remember the first time I used to do like a shot every morning. First time I did it, I thought someone had like poured like acid down my chest or something. I was like over the sink, just like.
Far out. Yeah.
I also did the fenugreek stuff for a bit as well. Did you do that one?
I did. I was eating loads of fermented food at one point, and like just drinking the vinegar and stuff. And like,
did your subscap and umbilical measure, or did your subscap measurement go down on the calipers, or?
Unfortunately, nothing changed.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was funny. I did nothing for my love handles at all, but.
Classic.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I was actually doing that. I was doing this. There was about a year straight. I don't think I really ate carbs in a normal diet. And what I mean by that is my normal diet was just literally just protein and fats. And then one day a week, one meal a week would just be a massive amount of pasta. And I did that for about a good 1 or 2 years. And I think a lot of it was during university as well. So I was still drinking, but just wasn't eating any carbs. Similar to what you said earlier, like I was doing the whole high fat, like when I'm talking about high fat, I'm saying like, well, I was putting cheese on anything I ate and then butter on top of the cheese. And I'd put the butter on top. And I remember uni mates be like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm just keeping insulin in check. And
my breakfast, right, for well over a year was 8 eggs and 35 grams of cheese on top of it. And I was like, no, managing insulin. So
Steak nuts.
I did for a period. I also did. I was trying to get the fattiest steak possible, and then macadamias only. And macadamias were bloody expensive as well. Like they weren't cheap, these things. No. They were the best nuts.
Steak and meat and nut breakfast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I just learned I just needed to control my calories. And all these things, like, and this is another thing we'll probably talk about is once calories are the most important thing, then protein, and then after that, it doesn't really matter what you do. So, every week on my Monday Q&A, I without fail will get a question around, is it okay if I, how do I allocate my carbs and fats? Should I go keto? Should I go high carb, low carb? Does it really matter?
What matters is how it aligns with your preference and your lifestyle. Because as we know, adherence is king. And so having something that you can adhere to, which is linked in then with something that you enjoy and fits with your lifestyle, is going to allow you to then adhere to it consistently, which is then going to get you the results. So look at food preferences and how they affect how you enjoy them in terms of taste, but also in terms of satiety. If you're someone who loves things like oats, you love rice, potatoes, then pushing carbs up and maybe pulling fats down a little bit lower is probably going to be good for you. If you find you stay way fuller and more satiated on a higher fat diet, or you really enjoy nuts, you love avocados, things like that, then pull carbs down a little bit, let fats come up. These are the really small minutiae where different parties within the fitness industry will argue over. But in reality, there's very little research to show there's any significant difference once, like you've said, if calories are matched, protein's matched. The difference then with how you're playing around with carbs and fats is across the vast majority of literature is insignificant.
Yeah. You obviously don't want to go too low in fats, right? There is like a minimum that you want to be hitting just for like hormonal health and stuff like that. But after that, like it's free reign. Like I would say for a male, you can go as low as, I would say 0.5 per kilo, 0.5 grams per kilo.
Fat.
Yeah, for fat. Yeah, I wouldn't go any lower than that. It's just and as long as you're getting like essential fatty acids, then you're good. Like, so that's like your omega-3s and stuff, because that's stuff that you just need to get in. Just we can't manufacture the 8 essential amino acids, and we can't manufacture essential fatty acids. So as long as we get them in, then you're sweet, right? And then if you hit that minimum fats, carbohydrates can go up as high as you like within the context of your calories, right? Or if you want to add more fats, go for your life. Yeah, as Ed was saying, if you feel more satiated and fuller on a higher fat diet, I know some people prefer higher fat diets just because they have probably more richness, more taste on the whole. That's fantastic. And you stay full and you have good energy to do what you like. excellent, more power to you. You know, there are some people who love the keto they think it improves their brain performance. Fantastic. Stick to that if that's what you think it's doing. Or whatever.
Well worded.
Yeah. But yeah, it all comes down to that personal preference, right? And finding what works. And yeah, but again, it's paying attention to how you feel. It's paying attention to how you're sleeping. It's paying attention to your digestion. All these things are going to give you a good indicator of your nutritional approach. So it's not just about hitting certain numbers and just looking at the scale. It's about you using the scale, but using all the subjective measures that go with that. So I think that's very, very important too, that a lot of people miss. I think a lot of people in the fitness community get caught up in just macros and have I hit my macros? That's all they focus on, right? They don't actually focus on, okay, what foods make me feel like garbage? What foods make me feel good? What foods make me feel full, etc., etc.
That's why the whole if it fits your macro thing never really worked for people, because people were getting more worried about how they can fit Twinkies into their diet than proper vegetables and proper starches for their carbs, proper fat sources. Right? Otherwise, people were getting all these crappy trans fats and just poor quality foods into their diet and just trying to find any way to play the game.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Then you miss out on important macros too, you know?
And that's just linked back to that Twinkie diet. You know, you can have all of these, you know, junk foods in there, but satiety is going to be bad. How you're feeling and performing isn't going to be optimal, which then obviously isn't sustainable if you want to be, you know, a high performer consistently.
On the fats, I think Ivan, you said 0.5 for males. I think something similar works well for females as well.
Yeah. I think going at the end of like a diet, then you got to do what you got to do. But over the long term, you know, I would say, I think females do seem to, from the research, do seem to run a little bit better on higher fats. Their hormonal profile or whatever it is. I know we spoke about the hormones not having much impact on fat loss, but from just like a general health standpoint, I think females, if they do have a higher fat intake than males, is probably a decent guideline as well. So just for overall health and, you know, skin and hair and all that good stuff. So
it's probably why my skin and hair falls apart when I diet, because I go really low fat. I over like 30 grams. For the last 4 to 6 weeks.
That's okay. Like the last for a temporary amount of time. And you know what? On that note, you actually just reminded me, the whole low fat craze, or how bodybuilders push the whole low fat thing, is because they're on anabolics, right? As a male, if you're not getting enough fats in your diet, and if you're not getting enough, obviously calories too, calories probably be more important than the actual fats. But you know, if you're a male and you're running super low fats, then you're also running the risk of low testosterone too. You know, but again, if you're taking anabolics, then you don't have to worry about that, do you? So, yeah.
That's
the whole high carbs is what it's made of,
So many people miss the fact that bodybuilders use steroids.
Yeah.
Go on, Ed.
Yeah, no, I was just going to build on the fat comment from Ivan, just saying that I have in the past gone lower and felt the implications, but I think, you know, 0.5 grams per kilo is a good baseline for males. But then I know as I build calories up, or if I'm in a muscle building phase, I have more room to push them up. When I get to about 0.75, I notice a significant difference in terms of just like mood, energy levels. Libido is a big thing that I think is impacted with fat. Fat is kind of the biggest impact on hormones and how you're feeling. So if you do come out of a diet, you've increased food. Often carbs can be the thing that kind of get pushed initially a bit harder. If you find you're 3 months potentially or whatever past hitting a checkpoint or a photo shoot, and you still feel like some of these symptoms are still impacting you, like low libido, have a look at your fats and look at pushing them up a little bit, because that potentially can then you know, bring you back to life in certain areas.
I feel, for me, I found that around 80 to 95 grams or so a day is really nice for me. Any more, and it's not really necessary, and any less, I do definitely feel from a satiety point of view gets affected. Just from like, I'm talking lifestyle maintenance. I find that's sort of my sweet spot, which is a pretty decent amount, I think.
That's a very good amount.
Yeah.
I do like.
Go on.
You like fat?
Yeah,
I was gonna say, I personally I like between 50 to 60. I seem to run really, really well on carbs, personally. But that's my personal preference.
I'm on a 60 direct, and it's probably a little bit higher with like the traces from other stuff as well at the moment. But I find that's kind of a good thing. I think if I go up too high, I find that I just feel so full all the time.
Yep.
I feel like I can, if I go higher carb, I can just digest it a lot quicker. But especially in like a muscle building phase where food's potentially higher, if I have a high fat meal, by the time the next meal comes around, I'm just not hungry at all.
What are you pushing calorie wise at the moment?
I think it would roughly be about 4,500 at the moment.
Oh, wow, really?
It's gone pretty high. Yeah, carbs are at 550. So he's he's definitely pushed things up more aggressively. And to be honest, I had a coach at the beginning of my investment phase because I wanted to make sure that I wanted an objective look, so I would be pushed outside of potentially my comfort zone. I think we all know it's hard sometimes to let go of condition. I think we've all talked about that before, wanting to stay too lean or, not wanting to say goodbye to, I don't know, certain indicators of leanness, whether it's like vascularity or whatever. So I knew if I wanted to really commit and take myself further than I had been before, I needed someone objectively to look at me and be able to push me on. Because I know I wouldn't have taken the food this high myself.
Are you the heaviest you've ever been?
Yeah. Heaviest, but also strongest as well.
What's your condition like?
It's okay. I would say it's the top end of where I'd want it to be in terms of fluffiness. I think at the moment I think we're looking now just to hold it for a little bit and just consolidate where we're at. Ultimately, if you do a 2-year investment phase and you just try and build every month, you're adding like half a kilo, your muscle gain isn't going to keep up with that to the point of it still being beneficial. We're at a top end. This is the fluffiest I've been in a long time, but performance has increased with it as well. And so now we're just looking to consolidate this weight and just keep improving performance, and hopefully in a month, 2 months time, this same weight will just be looking a little bit crisper.
Consolidation for when you're muscle building is actually underrated, isn't it? It's there's a lot of value in getting used to a new body weight, especially if you're in new uncharted territory like you are. Your body will want to revert back to what it's comfortable at, and it's almost like when you go too lean, it wants to come up. When you go into new body weight zones, and it's intentional. You're not just getting sloppy with yourself. You're actually intentionally driving up. Your natural default is to pull back, and I'm sure you're probably at the point where you're almost like forcing food down a bit.
I haven't looked forward to a meal in quite a while now.
Yeah, and you have to almost consolidate that, because muscle mass is the first thing that if you ran a diet, for example, muscle mass would be the first thing that will go. You have to almost like consolidate a new body weight, and it's very like sort of, I don't know how much science there is to it, but just from an anecdotal perspective, I found that if you get into new body weight territories in your building phase, you have to consolidate it before you push up again.
Yeah. I was listening to something with Scott Stevenson actually just yesterday on this, and he was saying ideally if you hit a high end body weight, you want to keep that for a year to really consolidate it if you want to make sure that muscle is there for good. And basically it's the longer you have it, he said, I think minimum 3 months he would normally say, but the longer the better really, is going to consolidate and make it harder for it then to drop off once you then go into, say, a fat loss phase.
Yep. That's why I personally don't like mini cuts, in my opinion. I don't see much like real science or research for them, for the long term. But I don't know.
This is better off just holding and accepting. This is better off holding and accepting the fluff.
Well, yeah, based off what Ed just said there too, you know what I mean? And like, I think a mini cut seems to be, again, just a psychological break from just having to eat so much food. You may like reset your desire to want to keep eating, you know what I mean? But from a physiologic, from like a trying to just manage your fat mass point of view, like if you're doing the bulk sensibly and you're doing it appropriately, like, is there really a need for a mini cut if the goal is muscle building, lengthy muscle building?
Most people can't handle the fluff. That's what it is. They can't handle being comfortable in that fluff. And that's why I say you have to embrace the fluff, because you have to learn to live with a bit of fluff. If you want to drastically improve your physique, you have to stay there and not worry that, okay, I'm not going to look that good for the beach this year, but I'm going to look 10 times better in a couple of years' time. It's playing the long game with it. And a mini cut is a nice, easy way to think, oh yeah, I'm back on it. I'm sharp again. And there's a whole psychological thing around. You almost, again, it's comes to that thing where people are respected for doing a mini cut, when no, they should be respected for staying fluffy and knowing that they're getting performance gains from it.
I think it's the same as a refeed, just on a different scale. It's just on the opposite end of the spectrum. Oh yeah, it's boosting my metabolism. No. Or yeah, it's resensitizing me to muscle building again. No.
Honestly, we see so many better physiques if people would lean into the idea of having a little bit extra body fat for a while. And one of the reasons you, Ivan, for example, can stay lean year round now is because I'm sure that you've spent years in your past fluffy periods. You didn't stay shredded for the last 10 years, did you? It's only after you built the foundation that you're able to do this.
Exactly. And again, if I did spend even more time, I probably would be able to maintain more muscle mass now. But that's not really a huge priority for me at the moment. But yeah, looking back, I'm really happy that I did put in those years of not wanting to always be shredded. But then again, like back when we were doing it, we didn't have
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point.
Or we didn't have like social media in our face all the time.
He's just muting himself. Ivan, you're muting yourself. You're about to say we didn't.
You're on mute, Ivan.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought it was your connection had gone.
He just muted himself.
Call me. I've got no friends. Don't call me. I was like, what the hell? Yeah, because we didn't have social media back in the day, right? So we didn't have images of shredded physiques year round looking at us in the face as when we were growing up. You know what I mean? Imagine if we did that in our younger years when we were actually trying to grow, and then all we see is just shredded people everywhere. You know what I mean? Because back then it wasn't really anything. It's like, you were just exposed to the people around you. You know what I mean? And the people that I hung out with, we all just wanted to like put on muscle mass, eat a lot of food, have fun, and it was a good time. And I'm happy that I was in that crowd back then, because a lot of my years was spent just building muscle mass, getting stronger, all that stuff I really, really enjoyed,
Yeah, I think it's definitely built the foundation. I think people might be listening and thinking, oh, this is only for men, but this is actually equally applicable to women as well. Women who want to be more toned, want to build more shape, want to build, whether it's more width on their shoulders or better glutes or whatever it may be. If you want to be more toned, you also have to do this. And this isn't about getting fat or anything like that. It's just about accepting a little bit extra body fat for the extra performance gain and for the ability for your body to actually build some muscle. And if any women listening wondering, having that muscle building, again, this is a myth around women and muscle building, in that when they say they want to be toned, being toned is just having more muscle and less body fat. Having shape is just having more muscle and less body fat. So if those are some of your goals, then you should go through this period as well. And even if your goal is just strength, you should go through this period, because you'll be able to get stronger. And when you want to get to a point where you want to lifestyle it and be in maintenance mode, then you'll be maintaining at a better point and a higher set point.
Yeah, and I just want to say something just real quick. Even with the strength side of things, like there is a limit to how strong I can get now. You know what I mean? On certain things, especially like lower body stuff, I can't. If I want to stay like this, I have to also accept, okay, there's going to be a limit to how strong I can get. And that's cool with all the stuff that I'm doing now. But if my goals were to change, if my priorities were to be in the gym and want to start packing on muscle and getting stronger, I can't just go, cool, I'm just going to stay this lean and then just get stronger and bigger. No, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? I sort of made that deal with the devil. I'm like, cool, I'm going to stay like this, but there is going to be a limit to what I can do. And luckily, like my training is different now compared to what it was before. And I still feel a lot stronger with the stuff that I'm doing. But if I was to go back to more barbell work, to stuff that was heavier loading, I'm sure you guys can agree to this. Like a squat when you're 20 kilos heavier feels a lot nicer than when you're like bone dry. Yeah. You know what I mean? When you got like nothing supporting you at the bottom, like it's not fun, right?
No, for me, the biggest one's pressing as well. I feel like for me, like legs and back stuff, I can progress okay when I'm leaner, but as soon as body weight starts moving up, is when I'm making my best progress with pressing. And when I am lean, I do find that it just stalls out very quickly. So for me, as I've driven body weight up, that's been the biggest thing for me, is pressing has gone into a new, new levels. And I think relatively, if I look across all my lifts, my pressing is relatively the weakest. And I think it's because I've spent too long not with this bit of excess body weight to help me, progress them over time, really.
Weight moves weight, right?
Yeah, exactly.
In order to build muscle, you need to move more weight, which is why it comes. I find that there's also body weight ranges that people have, in that there's a range that unlocks a new level of strength. Like I know, for example, if I'm between like 78 and 82, I stay at a pretty certain strength level. And if I want to break through, I need to be in the 82 to 84 and a half or so. And then after 84 to 87 is where I'm the strongest I've ever been. And then 87 to 90 was just diminishing returns because I was just getting fat. It was just too much. But so you'll find if you do that, you can kind of see where your ranges are and what you like to sit in. Like right now, my goal now is for the foreseeable future to stay where I am relatively in terms of leanness. But I accept with that, like you said with yourself, Ivan, is that I'm going to have certain caps on my strength, and I'm not going to get as much progression in the gym. But that's okay. Like I've accepted it. And for me now, I'm more after getting into the void than chasing the extra sort of weight on the bar at the moment. So, but that might change. And if it does, then I'll push it up.
Exactly. And on that note as well, like, people think that they just have to keep eating excess calories every week to continue getting stronger. When I would say, find a good calorie target for you to stay on for a while, and milk as much as you can from that calorie intake, from like a strength and hypertrophy sort of standpoint, right? You don't have to always be increasing food. People think that they just have to keep eating more. It's like, no. Your calories don't dictate your progress. Your progress dictates your progress. If you're getting stronger in the gym, you're adding muscle and you're looking better on the food that you're on, you keep with that food. You know what I mean? Like, there is no reason for you just to keep on wanting to increase it unnecessarily. Like I would say, if you want to milk that calorie intake for as much as you can, and then otherwise you get to Ed's position where he hates every meal and he just doesn't want to eat them again. So, and I would say for a lot of people, like, you don't need to be like in a huge surplus to continue making progress. I'm sure I think Ed's probably built up to that 4,500 calories, right? Like, that didn't just happen overnight. That's been like progressive.
Noticed, I think I've probably added 1,500 calories in just over 12 months.
Yeah.
And I've definitely gone at the more aggressive end of it, and that was fully intentional. We talk about the investment phase as a spectrum. I entered my investment phase fully on that muscle building side, and that was my full intention. So if you think that over the 12-month period, if you're closer to the middle or closer to the lifestyle solution side of things, then that increase, definitely doesn't have to be aggressive. And also, something just to touch on is all of these numbers are relative. So for me, increasing 100 calories is different to someone else increasing 100 calories. If we both have done a photo shoot, I'm 70 kilos, someone else is 50 kilos, someone else is 80 kilos, and we're all lean, the amounts of actual food in terms of actual calories we increase need to be in line with our size as well. A 50 kilo woman adding 200 calories can have a different effect to an 80 kilo guy adding 200 calories.
Yep.
Did we cover some good ground there? We went through all the macros, and then we ended up on a tangent on how you should embrace the fluff. Love it. Next week we'll probably cover some maybe some training stuff. Unless we continue with nutrition, we'll see what we feel when we record that day. Otherwise, thanks for listening.